We're very pleased on Future Vision today to welcome the Shadow Secretary of State for Brexit, Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir has had an impressive career, both as a human rights lawyer and of course served time as Director of Public Prosecutions under a previous administration. Sir Keir has been very active in promoting an alternative view of Brexit, and he joins me now. Sir Keir Starmer, welcome. We've probably had the most turbulent 24 hours of British politics for the last 50 years. What's your take on the events?
Yesterday was an extraordinary day in Parliament, and it's one of those days I think people will remember for a very, very long time, as you saw the Prime Minister come forward this historic moment with her deal to see what Parliament made of it, and as the day rolled out it was obvious that she didn't really have the backing of her own party. She didn't have the backing of her cabinet, and then as she made her statement in Parliament it was pretty clear that her own MPs are simply not going to back it. So after a year and a half of negotiation, to return with a deal that isn't going or isn't likely to get through Parliament was quite an extraordinary event. For me, of course, it was the loss of a second Brexit secretary. I used to shadow David Davis and then Dominic Raab. Both have gone, and at the moment we don't have a Brexit secretary.
So in terms of what Mrs May is saying, it's this deal or no deal. What do you think Labour can offer as a potential alternative, bearing in mind this morning that the EU has said no further negotiation?
I think the key difference between the Prime Minister's approach and Labour's approach is that we want something which is economically much closer to the EU. And we're driven by that from hundreds of discussions with different businesses, which I've had personally. Manufacturers are saying to me the just-in-time approach is absolutely vital, and the only way you can preserve that is having a customs union with the EU. And the service sector is hugely important. It's hardly dealt with in Theresa May's deal, and for that you need a single market deal that works for the UK. So we would want something much closer. I also think that's the only combination that will deliver on the solemn commitment to no hard border in Northern Ireland.
But how are you going to get that when the EU has this morning said there's no further negotiation possible?
Well, I think we need to distinguish between the withdrawal agreement, which will be legally binding and which has to be finalised in the next few weeks, and the future relationship, which at the moment on Theresa May's deal is only 7 pages long. That inevitably is going to have to be negotiated during the transition period. So for the withdrawal agreement, which is the money, the citizens, the Northern Ireland situation, etc., then true enough, time is running out. But I think for the thing that really matters, which is what's the future relationship with the EU, clearly that's something which nobody thinks is going to come into force until at the earliest 2021, I suspect a bit after that. So I think the comments of the EU need to be seen in the context of the difference between the withdrawal agreement, which is going to be legally binding before March, and the future relationship.
There have been increasing calls for a people's vote. We've seen 700,000 people march through London demanding a people's vote. Not really sure what they're asking a people's vote on, but there is certainly a move for the public to be given another say in what happens with Brexit, because they're saying that this is not what we voted for, this is not what we expected, we demand to have another say. How does Labour regard that?
Well, I think the fact that there were 700,000 people on a march is really significant. In the United Kingdom, we don't have marches that big very often. I suspect, and I think that it reflects a much bigger group of people who are increasingly anxious about the outcome and are losing confidence in the government's ability to actually deliver on Brexit. And I think yesterday would have only fueled that. As far as the Labour Party is concerned, what we've said is that we'll focus first on the deal. We've got to judge the deal. Well, now we've got it, and we have tested it against our tests, and we say it's not good enough. If that deal falls because it's not voted through in Parliament, there really ought to be a general election, and we'll call for one. But if that doesn't happen...
That's not in your gift, though.
That's not in our gift. It's not in our gift, I accept that, which is why we've gone on to say, should there not be a general election, other options need to be on the table, and a public vote is one of them. So we're looking at the decisions as they arrive, the deal first, Question of a general election, not in our gift, and then other options, one of which is a public vote.
As you'll be aware, there's a lot of manufacturing business up in this part of the world, in the northeast, and they are becoming very concerned about the possibility of a no deal, the just-in-time issue which you raised a few minutes ago. Do companies start stockpiling? How are they going to cope with difficult border crossings? All these things are, and you know, the global investment that's in the northeast is highly significant. And as we saw with Siemens, global investment can very quickly turn to disinvestment. How worried are you about the prospects for business in this part of the world?
I am deeply concerned, and I think whether it's manufacturing or service, there is a real anxiety out there, partly about what deal are we going to get, but I think at the moment about the uncertainty and concern about no deal. I've never accepted that the alternative to whatever the Prime Minister has been able to cobble together is no deal. It really isn't right to say to Parliament or to the country that you can have this pretty inadequate package, and if you don't like that, you can have something even worse. I mean, in the 21st century, on the new relationship with Europe, that is a hopeless place to get to. And I genuinely believe that MPs in the House of Commons from all parties, including Conservative MPs, are not prepared to countenance no deal, and there will come a point when it's necessary where we will act together to prevent that. And there are plenty of Conservative MPs who have spoken to me about the need, if necessary, to pull together to stop no deal, because no deal will be catastrophic for businesses here in the northeast and across the United Kingdom, and we cannot allow it to happen.
Someone I know runs a pharmaceutical company in developing new drugs. He's just had a £48 million loan from the European Investment Bank, the condition of which he couldn't actually function in England.
Yeah.
If he wouldn't get the money unless he moved to another EU country. If you were running a business today, what would you be doing?
Well, I would be concerned about that, and I think that the investment and funding has been a long-term problem in the United Kingdom. I think there's been much too much focus on investment for a short-term return instead of long-term, and I think the only way forward is to have regional investment banks that operate across the country, including Labour have proposed one in the northeast, that can serve some of those functions because they're vital, they're needed, and as we depart from the European investment basis and bank, then we need something to replicate it.
The final question. You're well known as a champion of human rights. You've had a career as a human rights lawyer. There's practically nothing in the draft deal so far about employment rights, the rights of the individual, and human rights. So, final question. Is the human rights environment which we currently enjoy going to be replicated in any Brexit deal?
Well, at the moment it's not, and this is one of the concerns. There are quite strong provisions on state aid and issues like that, but when it comes to workplace rights and environmental standards, etc., the document is very, very thin. And one of my big worries is, if you put all the technical issues on one side, is that some of those that sort of were supporting Brexit from the start were doing it because what they really want in the UK is a deregulated state where there's less protection of people at work, because in their eyes it will make us more competitive. I don't agree, and I think this is a real risk, and I think people at work would feel that if their holidays, their working time, etc., were interfered with, that will be a negative step, not a positive step.
Final question. If you were a betting man, what do you think will happen? Are we going to go? Are we going to get this deal, an amended deal, or no deal, and an exit crash?
Well, I'm obviously not a very good betting man, because I've only been in politics for 3.5 years. There've been some major changes, most of which I thought would go in a different direction. What I will go this far, which is to say that I think that the deal that the Prime Minister put forward yesterday is pretty evidently not going to get through Parliament. Lots of people have been focusing on what's the Labour Party going to do, but if you just watched in Parliament yesterday, the number of Tory MPs who got up and said, I'm not going to support it. The Prime Minister's got such little support on her own side that she can't realistically put this deal forward, and that's the conundrum she's now in.
So another crisis in December?
I think another crisis in December. I think probably another crisis next week. I think this is going to be rolled out in really fast time. We don't know yet whether the Prime Minister is going to survive. There may be a leadership challenge to her. She may or may not survive that. So lots to happen next week. The only thing I'd say about that, or the two things I'd say about that is, you can criticise the Prime Minister, but at least she's sticking to the task. I've got less time, frankly, for some of the individuals who made promises in the referendum campaign, were asked to step up to the plate to deliver on their promises, and now have walked away from the challenge. And I don't think that they should have done that. I'd also say this, that even if you change the Prime Minister, so if there's a leadership challenge, the numbers in Parliament stay the same. You don't change your chances of success because the numbers are the numbers. So we'll see what happens next week, but I don't think it's going to be a quiet week.
Well, I hope you manage to get some sleep at any rate in the next week.
Thank you very much
indeed.